Hi everyone, my name is Jillian, this is my channel, and I want to talk about why I don't support or really like at all wilderness therapy, because I have been thinking about this a bit. I had a conversation with my mom today about wilderness, and she's a little more pro wilderness than I am. My brother got sent to wilderness. I would like to say I didn't get sent to wilderness. I've never been to wilderness. But I do have a lot of friends, almost all my friends have been to wilderness, and my brother's been to wilderness. But it got me thinking a lot about my feelings on it, the sort of ethics of it in a way, which I won't go too much into, but I think it's a really interesting thought process. And I just want to talk about why I don't really like it, because I think that's an interesting conversation to have, and I do want to bring a little more awareness and understanding to wilderness. Okay, so I have a few notes to make before we get started with my main points, and I have a whole note that I'm going to be reading off of. So like I said, I didn't go to wilderness, but a lot of my friends have, and my brother did. However, I will never know what it's like to live with the trauma from wilderness, so I kind of have the benefit of ignorance to some degree. And also, I know not all wildernesses are created equal. Some are a lot more abusive and traumatizing than others, not to invalidate anyone's trauma, but it's just a mixed batch of treatment centers. So yeah, those are my main notes, I guess. And with that being said, I guess I'll talk about my main points. So number one is just traumatizing and unethical. I feel like I always try to give people a better understanding of what it's like from what I understand about it. So let me give you an example. Imagine being dropped in literally the middle of nowhere, forced to hike, eat terrible food, and go to the bathroom with no privacy. Along with that, you have no contact with the outside world besides the staff, and if you can write letters or talk to someone, it's monitored and censored. That's what wilderness is like, and it's a terrifying, traumatic, and sometimes abusive experience. I know maybe to some people it doesn't seem like a very big deal, which I'll get into later, but I think it's good to come from wilderness from an understanding and empathetic point of view, because it's terrifying. And for some people, you can genuinely get legally kidnapped and sent to a wilderness. People call it gooning. It doesn't happen to everyone. It's not standard for every single wilderness, but it happened to my brother. It's happened to a lot of my friends, and it's absolutely terrifying. Also, a lot of wildernesses tend to starve a lot of their kids and underfeed them, which is abusive, literally, neglectful. And I mean, it would be ignorant to not also note that there have been a lot of serious allegations towards a lot of wildernesses. For example, a lot of wildernesses have been accused of SA by the staff, a lot of neglect, like I said, a lot of starving. This is going to be a really dark video, I'm sorry. Yeah, so there's a lot of abuse at a lot of these places, and it would be ignorant for me to not include that. Almost all of the wildernesses that I've heard of have been terrifying places and unsafe places to be. So yeah, okay, moving on. Number two, this is more of a specific reason why, but it can force your kid to quote-unquote get better without actually creating any positive change. You are traumatizing your kid into getting better, which isn't actually going to help your kid get better. In order for someone to genuinely use the support and help they're given, they need to have intrinsic motivation. And if you don't know, intrinsic motivation is internal motivation that you yourself have without any drive from any outside external sources. They need to want to get better for their own personal reasons, or they simply won't. Sending your child to wilderness is not only irresponsible and unfair, it's traumatizing for your said kid, and will only ingrain in them the idea that they should pretend to get better for the purpose of leaving that place. That is, again, traumatizing and or abusive. So those are my main 2 points. I probably could have written a few more, but those are the basis arguments. And obviously I have more arguments because I have counter arguments. So one of the main things that I hear about wilderness, that my mom especially feels, is that wilderness is the last resort for parents, or the parents don't know what else to do. Although I understand completely where these usually well-meaning parents come from, it's not really a fair excuse. I get that there can be a point where a parent feels like their child is in need of serious help and they don't know what to do, but this, in my opinion, is the most tricky ethical dilemma of wilderness. Like, for example, some questions that probably a lot of people are thinking, like, what does a parent do if their child doesn't want to get better? Or what does a parent do if their child is too ignorant to understand what the consequences of their actions are? Those are a lot of common thoughts I'm assuming that a lot of parents have and can lead to them getting sent to wilderness. These are seriously hard questions to answer, and for a lot of parents, the risk of wilderness seems to be worth it if any positive change can come out of it. However, I'd say it's not worth it. And rather than blaming the parents for sending their children to wilderness, although I understand doing that too, I think it's more productive to 1. Acknowledge the trauma that countless victims have gone through from wilderness. 2. Start a conversation about said trauma. 3. Hold the wildernesses accountable and shut them down depending on the severity of their actions. And 4. Figure out better and safer alternatives and maybe create new alternatives to wildernesses over time. To me, this is such a better option than just pointing fingers at everyone involved, because that's not productive, you know? And focusing on viable and safe alternatives to wilderness is so important, because that lack of other options is the whole reason parents sent their kids to wilderness in the first place. So that's one of my main counter arguments, because that's the biggest thing that I hear. That's my thoughts on it. I know it's probably the most tricky and understandable question and thought that a lot of parents have, because truly, what do you do if your kid just doesn't want to get better? You can send them to a hospital or a psych ward, but if they don't want to use the help they're given, it's not going to do anything. I, for one, have never been really against help or support. I mean, not to the extent that I know a lot of other people have been. I've always really wanted to get better, which isn't a stab at anyone else. It's just, me personally, I've not really been against the idea, and I understand that some people are for their own personal reasons, so I'm not judging. I'm just saying I've not needed to really get to that point, but I know other people that have, because they just couldn't see why they needed that, or they were just so against it for their own personal reasons. Okay, moving on. I'm yapping. Another point I see, some people say, we don't actually know if the people that went to these wildernesses are telling the truth, or anything along the lines of invalidating or minimizing victims' experiences. From what I know, there are far too many victims with the exact same / very similar experiences and stories to be lying. And if you think it's not that bad, or you would like to minimize these experiences, first of all, you didn't experience that trauma. You don't know firsthand what it's like. And second of all, everyone reacts to trauma differently. That's what makes trauma trauma. Maybe you experienced bullying as a kid, for example, and it barely influenced you as an adult. But someone else could have experienced bullying and taken it a lot differently. They could have internalized it and started experiencing lifelong anxiety or depression, etc. They could have started to feel a lot more insecure than you did when you experienced it, because you are both different people with different reactions to similar experiences. Long story short, trauma is more so your reaction, not the traumatizing event itself. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. Honestly, I have a lot more to say, but that was just what I jot down pretty quickly. I think there's a lot of ignorance involved with people rooting for wilderness, a lot. I think, obviously, wilderness can help some people. I think of it a lot like psych wards, because psych wards can be so abusive. I've seen it firsthand, but they can also be so helpful. I personally feel like the psych wards I've been to, they have been sometimes abusive, but they've helped give me motivation to get better, which I know might sound a little bit odd. I won't really go more into that. I just think there's obviously silver lining to everything. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that have been to wilderness that found it really helpful, and I'm so glad that you felt that way. That's really genuinely amazing. However, I know people very well that have genuinely had their life ruined by wilderness, and that's something that I think is worth talking about. Obviously, like I said, not all wilderness is created equal, and there are definitely some really helpful wildernesses out there, but for me, I've seen firsthand how much wilderness can destroy a person, and I think it's worth having a conversation about those really abusive and traumatizing wildernesses, and also acknowledging that some can be good, but I think it's really important to shed a light on the bad experiences because you can make stuff better because of it, you know? And I think that's a conversation worth having. I think it's really important to actually hold these places accountable. Hold these, not just wildernesses too, any kind of treatment center. Really anything in general, but when we're talking about treatment specifically, any treatment. A therapeutic boarding school, a residential, a psych ward, and wilderness. Those are all really, really important things to hold accountable because just changing one aspect of treatment, like wilderness, is not going to change it all. There are so many therapeutic boarding schools I've seen get shut down that are doing equally bad things to wilderness. The treatment world is just such a crazy place, and the amount of terrifying, traumatic things I've heard, I've seen happen is unacceptable in my opinion. There are so many unacceptable, unethical, just terrifying things that should not have ever happened to children, teenagers. The treatment world that I'm talking about is teenagers. That should never be happening. Of course it shouldn't happen to an adult, but it should not happen to a child, a teenager. I started treatment when I was 11. I've been in therapy since I was 4. The amount of things that I have heard from fellow kids that started treatment so early, it's disgusting, it's terrifying, and it really is so incredibly how did we let this happen, you know? I don't think that that's fair. I don't think it's okay. I think it's just something we all as a society need to work on changing. Anyways, I've been yapping, okay? Thank you for watching. I hope this helped in some way. I hope maybe I can lend you some wisdom, give you my 2 cents. And again, I didn't experience wilderness myself, so I don't know exactly what it was like. I can't tell you exactly how it went, and obviously I'm not going to have to live with the trauma that other people have to live with. So I understand that, but yeah. Thank you for watching. Bye.